when you go to a website, all these companies are collecting your information to match an ad to you. Well, the browser knows what you're doing. The browser knows you better than some company does. So we just put the matching logic directly in the browser so that it can happen on the browser instead of happening in the cloud by a bunch of companies you've never heard of. And by the way, like, I worked with those companies that you've never heard of, and I can't even tell you where your data ends up. And it was literally my job to know. This stuff gets photocopies sent around, all synced up by all these different other parties you've never heard of. Like, these things start to get used against people when it comes to things like, even like health insurance and things with employment and other, it's not like a social credit score directly or implicit or explicitly, but like it's kind of shaping up to be that way.
Welcome back to another episode of Andrew Asks How podcast. I do have Luke here from the Brave/Bat team, a massive team in Web 2, now starting and have been in Web 3. A lot of impressive stuff you guys have done, Luke. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Luke, I will ask right off the bat, for people and context, how did you get to join the Brave/Bat team? And then what is your role within that team?
Yeah, it's a great question. So back in 2016, I was working in advertising, like in digital advertising, kind of between the biggest publishers and media companies and all of the ad stacks. And so like it was like a lot of like, okay, this is how all the sausage making is done with advertising. And you hit a point where you have a list of things you feel uncomfortable doing in a job. And we were working with some really great companies, and I liked how we got there. But also, like, I got into advertising when it went from just being a cookie on a website to following you everywhere you were going on the web, and then everything syncing with everything, and then just this huge like shift towards like programmatic advertising. And I hadn't really seen something like Brave until I saw Brave, which was like not just trying to give people really good privacy, which, having worked in that space like very closely and looking into it from an angle that very, very few people see, you really know the scope of the problem that most people aren't even aware of. And so the great thing I saw about Brave was like, it was not only were they a really good team and trying to like kind of make the web better and have a second chance at getting it right. They also wanted to make business work with privacy, which was really interesting to me because there were a couple of solutions around at the time that would say, hey, yeah, like we can still show an ad to a user that has ad blocking on, but now that's kind of user hostile. And no one was really saying, look, like, let's just make it work with privacy. And so I saw what Brave was doing, and then I saw, geez, like BrendanEich is like, founding this thing. I'm going to co-founding it at least. And then he has a really great blog post. That's the first one that's published on the Brave website. It's still there. It's all about how to like remake the web and fix the web. And it's as true today as it was then, if not more so. And the company has managed to even get more militant and kind of like, fixed on those first principles, even now, like 8 years later. So it's pretty awesome.
What were Brave's first principles? And I don't mean like the trust, the loyalty. I don't mean those.
Yeah.
I mean the business fundamentals that you guys saw, Brandon saw at that point in time. Like, this is going to be here for the next 500 years, which is why I'm doing this. Mm-hmm. And then I didn't know this. I found this out 2 weeks ago from our conversation prior to that. What Brendan had done prior to Brave, which was super impressive, but we can get into that as well. It'd be
Sure.
Awesome.
Yeah. So Brendan kind of is this icon in the space. He's this very underrated but like huge visionary that basically in the 1990s, Brendan created the JavaScript language in about 10 days. And he worked at Netscape very early on, and then was part of the team, like co-founded Mozilla Firefox and brought that to market. And so he's somebody that like knows, he kind of, if you talk about seeing Frankenstein's monster take over the world, right? Like Brendan created JavaScript and then saw how JavaScript was used by all of these, marketing companies. Something like a cookie was used to basically like profile and track people, and then what that ended up going to and growing to. And so I think that there's the right mix of like somebody that, when you think first principles, right? Like Brave's a user first software company. And what that really means beyond the soft marketing language is that we're building software that puts the user's priorities and their interest first, meaning that, like, you know, the browser, technically speaking, is a user agent, right? Like even down to like the user agent string. If that user agent is not working for the user, if that user agent is working on behalf of the corporation or company or a company's interest, then it's not really your user agent. And unfortunately, when you have a company where they built a huge mega industry out of advertising, and they also happen to, you know, they be the guard keeper of, you know, oh, they have a web browser that's like on every PC, or it's the number one, you know, web browser as far as adoption goes. It's over, you know, 2.6 billion people using it worldwide. I mean, the interests there get cloudy, and you see everywhere you look, you start seeing things of like companies putting their profit and interest over the interest of the user. And it's really simple. Users should have access to everything. Users should have control over what happens with their information, who can collect it, know that it's being collected if it is, and they should say yes or no as to whether they should be the one making the choice about their own information. You shouldn't have to accept a world where you just have to sacrifice your privacy in order to have a free internet. Like, I think that's kind of that's what people use when they try to defend the practices. But the reality is that, you know, nobody really anticipated it to get the way it was. It wasn't by design. It's just how things proliferated. Like, you can't, when things grow exponentially in the world of tech, like, you can't, no one really stopped to think about what the implications of that were. And so instead of like crying, you know, over spilled milk about it, or like sour grapes or whatever, you can't turn the clock back either. But what you can do is you can make a better way of doing it. And that's why I came to Brave. And that's what's so fundamental about what we're doing, is that we found ways that you can account for things without having to track users across the web. Or like in the case of a browser, like when you go to a website, all these companies are collecting your information to match an ad to you. Well, the browser knows what you're doing. The browser knows you better than some company does. So we just put the matching logic directly in the browser so that it can happen on the browser instead of happening in the cloud by a bunch of companies you've never heard of. And by the way, like, I worked with those companies that you've never heard of, and I can't even tell you where your data ends up. And it was literally my job to know. This stuff gets photocopies, sent around, all synced up by all these different other parties you've never heard of. Like, these things start to get used against people when it comes to things like, you know, even like health insurance and things with employment and other, and, you know, it's not like a social credit score directly or implicit or explicitly, but like it's kind of shaping up to be that way. Like, and companies do not care. So people have to build software that do care. And that's kind of why you've got people from all walks of life working at Brave, people that all were in really decent positions or roles at big companies or small companies that they spent a career getting there, and saw an opportunity here to give it a second chance. Because really, I mean, the last line of defense between, you know, the company's interest or yours is the browser. I mean, you really,
Yep.
aside from an operating system, which, you know, someday I hope we do that too. But in the meantime, you know, got to start with the browser, man. Window to the web.
I am Gen Z, so most of my generation does post their information online. They at times post more than they should. I think we can all agree with this.
Sure.
Luke, do you think they would stop doing this if they knew where it was ending up? Or do you think it doesn't matter? Because the person you were talking to in the reference said that they don't care. Do they not care because they don't know? Or do they don't care even that they do know?
I mean, I think it's one thing when you're speaking through a public forum, right? Like you're posting your life, even if it is some drunk party night or whatever piece of information you might regret posting later, which you can delete later, but like, that's one thing. It's a whole other thing altogether when you have companies that are harvesting your information behind a web page and you don't see that. You feel it. You know something's happening, because why is the spinning wheel on this home page for a news site still going and going and going and going? And sometimes you see the little hints at the bottom of the browser where it starts saying like all these things are happening. But why? Like, and I think that's the real crime in all of it. Not like a technical crime necessarily, but certainly one that the user's not aware of, where there are just so many things getting collected by people you've never heard of, and it's just a matter of time before that's used against people, and it already is in a lot of cases. I mean, so that's the thing I have issue with more. I think that's the thing where once people get exposed to that too, the reflex is pretty consistently that people are pissed off by that, because they start to see it used in other ways. People were talking about how, gosh, these companies are collecting all your location data. Like, how can that start to be used against people? Like in these states where things are illegal now, where they weren't illegal before, and all sorts of that, things like that. And there is no doubt that law enforcement and government agencies tend to overreach when they have access to more things that they maybe shouldn't have access to. And so I think that, there's enough patterns of behavior through these organizations and through these authorities and government figures to know that, okay, well, again, if we have the option to have one path or the other, I think most people would choose for the one that gives them privacy. And in a more fundamental level, I mean, I think the very concept of freedom, right, like, can't exist if you don't have a natural right to privacy, because, that's literally someone looking at everything you're doing is like about as far away from free as you can get.
Look, let's transition here. I'll ask, you guys obviously have 72 million, users every month, which is massive. Let's answer this question, and you can take any way you would like, Luke.
Sure.
Why Web3?
Yeah, no, I think it kind of goes hand in glove with this whole user first principle, right? Like, you think people writing books about read, write, own, right?
Yep.
There's a sense of, in the same way that privacy kind of gets taken advantage of, so do people with their financial transactions, and so do these massive institutions that kind of control the money flows, the digital money flows, at least around the world. And a lot of these things, I mean, if you think about when did Bitcoin come to life, it was right after the financial crisis in 2008. And people who probably wouldn't have gotten involved with this had they not been part of that global financial crisis, which, by the way, happened with totally regulated products that were AAA rated, and by all these agencies and these groups of people that seem to be arguing against math now. I think it's fundamental, right? Like, self-custody, this idea that you own the keys and that you have control over your money, and that you don't need to ask permission to transact, like, because it's kind of a LARP that people feel like every time you go buy something, you have to get authorization from a bank, even though you earn the money. The bank's taking your money and making more money with it. Why? Like, how did it get to this point where we're at the mercy of the suits and spreadsheets that are very far away from my normal life? And I think that what's empowering about Web3, both, from a technical perspective of, whether if all of a sudden decided that I was like not one of their friends and they wanted to shut off my service, how much of my life would be impacted by that change? And you've seen this happen where people have had like false positives. Like during COVID, there was one story of a guy whose kid got sick or something, and they had to take pictures and send over virtual appointment, and something in these CSAM scanners that get a false positive and said that it was like something, negative, like child porn or something, when it was just a doctor's visit, that the guy was literally a parent of a sick kid. The guy gets locked out of his account. All of his family photos are there. All of his histories there. All this stuff. That's because you're relying on a central authority, that a centrally hosted and centralized service that can do that, take that away from you. If you had a decentralized option that was easy to use, you have the access to your data. It is yours. And so Web3 is just part of the bigger web. It's about, putting it into users' hands, giving them the access to this, and taking it away from these companies who, they make great things. Like, don't get me wrong, I love a lot of this stuff, but also like they get into this monopoly position, and it's even getting to the courts now, where it's some of this is just, it doesn't necessarily conflict with capitalism, but like it's just stuff that runs amok. And if the regulators don't regulate it, and there's new technology, then let the technology do the talking. Like, people will do that. People went to Pirate Bay and all these torrents and things like that. Like, I think that's just human nature, right?
you guys obviously have two different community bases, one on Web 2 and one on Web 3. How do you guys take both into account and serve and appease both of them with different products, or is it the same products?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, and some of this, I think it changes over time too. In 2018, you go to a conference and they'd say like, Ethereum or Bitcoin cryptocurrency is not a crime. And now it's like, okay, things definitely get tribal. You definitely have people that are in positions where they're very anti Web3 or pro Web3 or whatever. But I think that's part of the adoption cycle and curve. And I think from our perspective, we do kind of have a Venn diagram. Like a lot of our earliest users were very much on the side of just like being really about privacy and security. And then, the Web3 stuff came big, and there's some overlap too. And I think we're growing that overlap over time. And a lot of it is just around making it part of the experience, because a lot of the things people don't like about this stuff are, if you look, I mean, like anecdotally, right? Like go on Twitter and see like people who hate on crypto say, oh, it's a scam, pumps and dumps, and, et cetera, like all these, things, when in reality, the technology isn't any of that. The technology is like an upgrade. It's just that in order to, it's just a natural part of like early adoption. And the same thing happened with the internet more broadly early on, and people calling it a fad and people saying it was all overhyped. And certainly things get overhyped. Certainly there are scams and terrible people. But here's the thing. When these things happen, they happen in the regular world too. Like we were just saying, the global financial crisis was all like, regulated securities that ran amok with institutions that people trusted. Bad behavior is going to be bad behavior. You're never going to get rid of that. The benefit of doing this with the blockchain is that you at least know what the hell's going on. Like, and people, I mean, people literally like they don't get paid to look at the chain. They just do it. It's the same thing with ad block filter list maintainers, right? Like we have Ryan Brown. He's the guy that created the fanboy blocking list and some of the earliest ad blocking tech that's out there. Like there are these ad block list maintainers. They just spend time on the forums fixing ad blocking issues. Nobody pays them. They just do it because they want an internet where they can have an internet without a lot of the junk. And so there's these pockets of people that are just like kind of good Samaritans out there that love getting to the bottom of this stuff. And you're giving them a place to do that. I mean, imagine if we had public access to the databases that were involved with the financial crisis as they were happening earlier on. You could have, saved so many retirements from people from getting, wiped out. So many people got thrown out of their houses. So many red flags that, if people believe the rating agencies, people believe, these agencies that are supposed to be protecting them. But what happens when they terribly, do a terrible job, which they did, then you lose trust in the system. And that's why I think a lot of these trustless systems started to come into place. And now the challenge is like, we're starting to see adoption happening, and you're starting to see the capture of some of these things in certain ways. And I think that's the next phase we're in, is like, okay, like, remember why you're here. Like, remember why you're building this stuff. Is it to make a better bank, or is it to make things that are empowering people? And it's a good debate to have with people. But yeah, it's kind of where we're at.
Luke, it's interesting because you guys have obviously massive frontiers on both sides. We can probably agree that most of the brands, we can't even call them businesses, most of the brands and some businesses in our industry are very focused and have to be focused in Web3 side of things, the Web3 pool. And they squeeze that grape too many times because they have no other form of revenue. And their success is really predicted and predicated on Web3. Like that's where they're trying to win. You guys have already won in Web2. So do you think that your Web3 success, it can affect your Web2 success, or do you think it's completely not dependent on it at all?
Oh, I think they can definitely. I think the job's never done either. I think when we hit 2 billion people, I'll be really happy. But in the meantime, I think that the wins work together, right? Like, and if we can have a situation where people are browsing the web and they're earning, and they can use that those tokens they're earning to buy real things, like, that's a win. And we start to see this, because BAT's been around for a while. Our token has been around since 2017, but people have been able to earn it in Brave since 2019. And, you go through these bear market and bull market cycles, and people just keep using the browser, right? It's their web browser. It's their thing. And people, when the last bull run happened, I'll never forget, there were times when BAT would hit these really high price points where people were like, oh my gosh, I've earned like $300 or $400 just from browsing the web. And those things are things where, like, we touched on this early on. There's a thing in Brave. We have the amount of ads you blocked and trackers you blocked. We measure that. They're called Brave stats. It's on the new tab page. And say, okay, we estimate how much time you save and how much data you save and then how many things you blocked. People love just sharing that stuff. But then also, like, when they're actually earning with their attention with that, and they've been a loyal user, I mean, like, these things, people love it. They just it's a retention hook. The more utility we can build into this to where you can actually use it to buy premium goods or buy stuff online. I mean, over 90% of browser users are making an e-commerce purchase. And so there's a lot of room there to normalize crypto to a broader audience. And that's one of the things where I think Brave is really well positioned to do that. I think a lot of these things that divide Web3, Web2, crypto, non-crypto, a lot of this is because crypto lives in a silo right now. You have one wallet in your browser for your traditional payment methods, and then you have one wallet for crypto stuff. And I think that over time, if we're winning, we're moving those things together. And, adding in a credit card number as one form of payment, adding in a crypto address as another is just a normal thing, right? And then all of this hoopla, it just goes away. Because when you get down to the bottom of it, I mean, like, server farms are horrible for the environment. All sorts of things are not great, but we're never getting rid of them. And I think that, it's on. We have to really focus as an industry on building products that people will actually use. Because the value props, they sing. Like, people get added value from the benefits of this stuff. A Web3 user doesn't need to know about self-custody or the benefits of first user principles. They just know that when they do this, they get a better value out of it. They aren't having to spend as much money eventually on some things, right? But like with Brave, I mean, we protect your privacy. What does that mean? Well, that means the pages load faster. That means you use less data. That means that you have better battery life. That means that you get YouTube without ads, and background playback. Like, you get all these great things that are benefits of having better privacy. I think Web3 is the same way. You get benefits of, like, what if my browser starts to pay me instead of me losing my data to all these companies that are building an empire off of it? I'm actually earning while I'm browsing. And I think, you're starting to see this in other places too. A buddy of mine at work, he has the Solana phone, right? The Solana mobile phone. Yeah. Yeah. And he has the Helios plan, and between the airdrops and the way that the Helium plan works on his phone, it's like the bill pays for itself. It's like revolutionary stuff. Like, you're totally flipping the consumer model, and they've managed to find a go-to-market model there. Yeah, it applies to crypto people at first, but it's just a matter of time before that stuff gets abstracted and called something else for the general public that's easier for them to consume. I mean, I think, the global market isn't the market of today, but we have to make steps in that direction. And that's where my beef is with this space right now, is I think there's way too much focus on over infra everything, and the infra is not even that great. It's just like a race to the mediocrity bottom right now in a lot of areas, unfortunately.
You mentioned BAT. So what is BAT? And then I'll stack the question with, what is the easiest way to earn BAT?
Yeah, so BAT's a basic attention token. It's a ERC20 token on Ethereum, but we also bridge that to other blockchains too, because attention's everywhere. We launched it in 2017. At the time, we issued out we put 1 billion of them up for sale. And there's a total supply of 1.5 billion. It's at about 99% of the total supply in circulation. What we're doing where you can earn BAT is if you go to Brave, you enable Brave Rewards, you can start to earn BAT through our platform. And if you want to take it out of the ecosystem, forever we've had like Uphold and Gemini and other custodians, ZebPay in India and Bitflyer in Japan, where you can link and withdraw it from the ecosystem through a custodian. Right now, we're actually in the process of making the first payments on Solana on chain, so that users in self-custody can actually link their self-custody wallets to rewards and do things directly on chain. That's kind of the big focus for this year, is like doing this. And the idea here is to kind of seed people with tokens for using the web and earning with their attention. Right now, we give people a percentage of the revenue from the advertising model that we have. So advertisers buy ads on Brave, and then users earn a percentage of the revenue from those ads in the form of our token. And so that's the easiest way to go about it now. I think we're looking at other ways we can adapt this model too. AI is huge. Where we're looking at different ways that this could apply, because to be frank, like advertising was the first model we went after, but it's really about the attention economy, and you can use this in a lot of different ways as part of the attention economy. But the nature of advertising is going to change with time too, and I think that this is where AI is playing a big factor right now. Like we have a new feature that we actually just released yesterday. It's this like advanced summarizer, it's like an answer engine on the search engine result page in Brave Search, where if you type in a certain type of query, it basically detects if it's best to give you like an AI response, and it's like a super rich answer that you get back. Well, traditional banner ads not going to work with that anymore. Like there's going to be better ways to incorporate commercial stuff into there, and it won't necessarily even probably look like an ad, but BAT will be part of that eventually too. So I think it's the attention economy. Like we're tokenizing attention. Like that's it. Plain and simple.
That's a good way to put it. Luke, if we took a survey right now and asked 1,000 Brave users, how many of them do you think would know about BAT and the entire Web3 side?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think we see about 10 to 20% of people opting in to rewards on Brave. Okay. So that's pretty decent number, but it could always be higher. The Web3 stuff's also an interesting thing. A lot of it depends on like when you became a Brave user, because we show certain onboarding about these features. Sometimes people don't go very deep. Like browsers are kind of a weird thing to market because you can put things right in front of people's faces and they'll be oblivious to them, and then they'll notice when something's gone. So I think one area where we're working on making it a lot better is around kind of product marketing and getting a lot of these Web3 features in front of people. But I think a lot of it honestly is a mix of just being able to have the tech work, and Web3. It gets thrown around a lot, but I mean, in Brave, we've actually built in some Web3 features. So we have Brave Talk, which is like Zoom, except it's like end-to-end encrypted option and privacy preserving kind of Zoom. But we've added Web3 features there. So if you have NFTs, you can NFT gate the calls. So accessing the calls if you have a certain NFT, or if you have the NFT, you could be a moderator, or you can set the PFP with the NFT art, etc. These kinds of token gating is kind of a really good Web3 use case. And also crypto domains are natively supported, and I think over time that'll become a more and more commonly used thing. Instead of having to have these long addresses that no one can remember, people can remember domain names. Like crypto domain names are a great way to send funds back and forth to people. But I think there's also like a lot of work on this front around privacy that needs to get applied now. We partner with Zcash. We're integrating Zcash right now. It's in the first version of it's in our wallet now, but we're gonna have shielded transactions and things like that. I think it's a big area that needs to get a lot of work, because that's where a lot of the battlefield is right now between regulators and the spaces around privacy and privacy tools. I think people look at Tornado Cash and developers getting arrested and stuff like that, and it's kind of scary. But realistically, like you got to build the privacy features and get them scalable quickly to the point where you can't ban them. They're just everywhere. I mean, people make arguments like, oh, well, this is getting used for illicit things, but so does Cash and Signal, and all these things get used. The Tor network is used by spies and criminals and everyday people. Like it's just, you don't hate the tool or the game, just get people where you can get them. And that's, where they're committing the crimes,
The current ecosystem with BAT and your Web3 side, do you think the community members on the BAT and Web3 side are using the Web3 products because they know about Brave, or do you think they came the other way through BAT when the initial TG event took place in 2017 and been here since?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So like we were one of those weird projects that actually had a product when we did a token launch, which was at 2017, it was like almost unheard of. And so it was funny though, because back then we would also see like people had heard about Brave first and then they heard about BAT. But then if you would go to Southeast Asia, because the crypto markets were so huge there, we did a bunch of marketing with BAT there and listings, etc. A lot of people heard about BAT first and then they heard about Brave. And now I think it's much more like people are finding out about Brave because we're finding product market fit with the stack, and then BAT's a part of that. But yeah, like a lot of people will also forget about it. Like they maybe have used it at an earlier time, and then for some reason or another, they put their focus elsewhere, and now they're kind of coming back. Like we're doing stuff with meme coins, we're doing stuff with NFTs, we're doing stuff like with dApps and all sorts of other things that are kind of making people look at it again and be like, oh yeah, like we're one of those few things too where you might have used it in 2017 and then now it's 2024 and you're still seeing it alive. Like so many projects like live in, I mean, they basically boom and bust with every cycle. We're one of those ones that stuck around cycle after cycle because we're actually building product that people use with the utility of the token in it.
Now, Luke, you mentioned BAT, right? I don't want to get this, the speculation going on here, but other than price go up, why should people purchase BAT and what can they do with it?
Yeah, so people, we're starting, like you see things like Web3 commerce where people can pay with crypto for things like whether it's Ethereum or on Solana's SPL tokens are supported, people could pay with BAT for things they're earning in the browser, right? Like there's a total supply of 1.5 billion. Like I said earlier, like 99% of it's in circulation. So one of those things that's interesting about the tokenomics side of BAT is that like as we grow Brave, right now we're 72 million monthly active users. We could easily get 5-10%, hopefully even higher, right? Like then you're talking about a significantly larger user base. Well, you're going to hit a point where right now people could own many BAT, right? Like, but at a certain point, there's only so much BAT to go around. So that becomes more and more fractionalized over time. So I think, users want to, some cases they buy it so they can, use it. They've been earning it for a while so they could top up with it. Advertisers, we know advertisers that are buying it now because they can buy a lot of it now and plan their media around it. Because that's one thing we didn't really talk about. Like, advertisers can buy campaigns in Brave with US dollars or with other crypto or with BAT. And one thing we're doing with BAT is actually incentivizing their media buys and giving them a better deal if they buy with BAT, because the system runs on it. There's less work we have to do if an advertiser pays with BAT because we don't have to go if an advertiser buys a campaign with dollars, like when we receive the dollars, we then go and we buy BAT off the market and then divide that out to the users based on the percentages of rewards that people are getting. When people are paying with BAT, it just goes right back to the user, right? So like we don't have to do a lot of overhead when that happens. And so basically like advertisers, we see them picking it up because there's like a lot of media that they want to spend in the future. We're not going anywhere but up. And I think it's one of those things where, if you're a smart media buyer, you're seeing the writing on the wall. There's an audience in Brave that is unreachable by programmatic advertising as long as they're in Brave. And so, yeah, we aren't billions of users at this point, but, I've certainly seen when we launched the ad platform, we had 5 million monthly active users. Now we're at over 70 million. His numbers are just going to keep going as long as we're sticking to our principles and as long as big tech keeps screwing up, which they don't seem to be having any plans on not screwing up anytime soon. So I think that, we even see things like with this antitrust stuff happening where in Europe had to change how they position browsers. And, I think we went up like 30% on installs in Europe on iOS because these small little changes start to happen. They're actually really meaningful. And so it gives you a sense of how dominant the market is by a few players, but how, when there's a product people want, they'll find it. I mean, but realistically too, it's a lot of this is just like telling people what the value is of the product. And with BAT, I think that, is one of those things where, there's always going to be early movers on this stuff. We're building out more and more use cases for it. The fact that it can go cross-chain too helps to accelerate that velocity and growth that we were talking about earlier. You're already seeing it too where, even at less than the users base we have now, the top 20 BAT holders, many of them are big exchanges those small exchange accounts don't get counted in those big addresses. But like we're already the 12th most distributed token on Ethereum by on-chain holders. And that's something we've held on to for a while, despite the market going from like, I don't even know. I think there were over 6,000 tokens issued on Solana alone this year so far. The numbers of tokens are just crazy, but like we just keep building and people keep earning. And I think that, smart people are pretty savvy with these things. The attention economy, like you hear about it all the time. Like, what's more valuable than time and attention? Few things. And so, yeah.
Luke, I'll ask this. You mentioned earlier, you guys are tokenizing attention. People would say that blockchain is tokenizing culture. How are you guys tokenizing attention?
How we so I think that, people, there was this meme that's been around. It's kind of a LARP too about like data being the new oil. when like data itself is non-fungible, right? Like your data is valued based on your profile and off of whether that's valuable or not. So that's actually like a non-fungible thing. Attention though is like the time you're spending doing something actively. So active engagement and time that you're actively engaged. And so in the browser, we know like what's in the foreground, where you're spending your attention, and we can put measures in that measure this stuff locally, and we can actually put a unit of account to that. And so that's how we basically do it. I think a lot of this is kind of also greenfield. We've seen BAT adopted in the secondary markets in a lot of ways. In 2019, we saw MakerDAO, Compound, Aave, a bunch of these early DeFi protocols adding BAT. We didn't anticipate BAT to be used in DeFi, but it was early on. We've seen that continue. Right now there's liquidity pools on Solana, for example. And then we started to see games that were like Gala Games and Splinterland started to add BAT in the games, and also the ability to mint NFTs with BAT, because we had that holder base that saw a product and saw a token and said, this is a cool thing, let me get in on this. And so I think that, how it's tokenized, initially it's just based on how we measure and attribute that. I think long term, like right now, we have 3 pilots out with meme coins where we're doing like every cycle we try to do some experimentation, because in that first beginning of the bull run, you can actually like see what's culturally trending, and we're in a position where we can actually add a lot of value to the market for projects if we stay ahead of the curve. And so meme coins craze started happening, and if you think about it, like attention tokens and attention and meme coins are like hand in glove. And so we actually started embedding with some of these meme coin projects early. One of them was called Mutai. I was sat with their groups and I was just listening to what got them excited, and they're, I think they were like 8 or 9 million market cap when I started talking with them, and they would be like, oh man, we got 10,000 impressions on this tweet, this is awesome. And I'd be like, oh guys, like let's go try something out. And then I was just like, angle it towards crypto users and low frequency and low volume, like 1 impression a day per user, and make sure they're really crypto users, and put it out there. And you start to see all this additional attention come to these meme coin projects. It's a great example of like how we can utilize attention. It's just like this ability to get something in front of tens of millions of people. Like I think over 2 weeks, we generate over 4 million impressions, and we're gating it at like a maximum of 2 or 3 impressions and 1 impression a day per user. So like, millions of people saw this that wouldn't otherwise see it. And there's a problem right now, and you're going to see these problems happen cyclically as crypto grows. You hit a certain amount of adoption, then it hits a ceiling, and then there's some stagnation, and people get to creative with how a population of 10,000 can look like 100,000 or like a million, whether it's Sybil attacks, bots, other things like that. Well, Brave, we're kind of in a different camp because we grew the user base. And so we can put attention on something and then get millions of more users in front of it that might not be in those circles. Like if we're doing meme coins on Solana as with these advertising pilots, there's a lot of people that looked at meme coins elsewhere that weren't exposed to this, but since they're seeing it through Brave, they're giving it a shot. And that's kind of what we're seeing, like the views. There's one called which HMM, which is like the second pilot that we did, was kind of a clever meme, transcends language, early stage project. But we launched a campaign with them, and within 6 hours, their 24-hour views were up like over 40,000%, which is insane.
That's
but
crazy.
It's just like, it's just bananas, right? Like, and then that steadies out, and then you start to see other metrics move, and it's like, these are the effects. And this is what's cool about it too. I mean, like, you don't need third parties to measure all this junk. Like we can put it out there. You can see the effects because they're on a blockchain. Like you can see what's happening as people discover and adopt these things, which is super cool. And it's kind of like, it feels good in a way because we spend a lot of time building and attacking different parts of this problem. And now we're finally at this stage where it's actually like technically becoming possible to do this at a bigger scale. So pretty bullish about that.
Luke, you mentioned your new AI product. 2 questions. First one is if we can get in depth of what is it, and how is Brave going to position yourself, your team within the future of AI? And then what's your personal take of AI? Any fears, anything you're excited for with the up and coming surge of this? I mean, AI has been around since the 40s.
Right.
But people only, but people have only started being attracted to it within the past 12 months. So
Exactly.
Your thoughts.
It's never been around until we first hear of it.
Yeah.
Right. Actually, I have a podcast too, The Brave Technologist. You can go to brave.com/podcast and see it. We did a whole season on AI stuff, and it kind of talked to a lot of range of people. I think from Brave's perspective, there's actually a great episode on there I did with our co-founder and CTO, who did our roadmap with this product called Brave Leo, which is our local AI kind of agent in the browser. It's a prompt. It's just there. Any Brave user can use it. And you can pick from different LLM models that are in there. So we have Llama, and we had Claude, and we have Mixtral in there. That's one area. I mean, there's been AI, and it's just the point you made around how it's been around for a long time. So we've been using AI with Brave actually for many, many years. Our privacy team started to use it early on with making for ad block list maintaining and getting rid of old rules and things like that were no longer in use. Our ad model uses local AI in the browser to match advertising locally based off what you're browsing without leaking that to any servers or anything like that. But I think more materially now, we have this AI tool in the browser called Leo, where it's kind of like a sidecar prompt, and it's with the browser level. So you can summarize a YouTube page. We could have it in this conversation right now, summarizing the whole conversation that we've had and giving you Cliff's notes for it, or summarizing a YouTube video or whatever. But then there's other interesting use cases too. I mean, there are dev tools in the browser. You can incorporate AI to help you with coding with dev tools, all sorts of things like that. And then, we have a search engine at Brave. If you go to search.brave.com, initially we put in a kind of a short form AI summarizer that would take that whole search engine result page, and it would give you a print of what it was summarized from that page of results, and it would attribute where the sourcing came from, which is something that's a problem with AI, where people are we don't know what the sources of the data are. So we took that to a whole new level with this new summarizer upgrade that we just came out with this week, where it actually it's kind of a mix between an AI prompt and the search engine result page. And so it'll actually give you rich media objects in the search result page that look and feel natural and are very accurate. Here's an example use case. So I like to play golf, and when you're kind of building your club set, you spend a lot of time looking up specs for different club sizes and things like that. Normally you'd have to go look up and hope that some dude posted this some years ago or whatever for my old golf clubs. I went and asked the search engine, hey, give me the golf specs for Ping i3 Plus golf clubs. And it spit out every club, the club length, the loft on the club, all of it just printed right there. Or give me the Bruce Springsteen albums. It gives you the whole catalog. You can see, you can go click and go actually listen to it. All this useful utility. And so we see this kind of AI answer engine as a way to go. But AI is going to be ubiquitous. It's going to be everywhere. And so from Brave's perspective, having it in there in a way that respects users' privacy and fits with our bigger ethos is there's a big void for that in the market right now. And I think just like everything else we do, we're building on those first principles with AI, it's going to be really important, because there are going to be things that people aren't even thinking about now with how companies will use this stuff that, if we're thinking about them when we're building them now, we're putting our users ahead of the curve. So I think, it's going to be a lot of places. AI is going to get incorporated everywhere. I have had people on the podcast. I've had regulators on the podcast that have been using AI and enforcing and regulating AI in the workplace and all these different things for years. There's already some weird cases, like in the UK. I had a guest on who was talking about how there was a service that was it was trying to use AI to help stamp out postal fraud in the UK, but it ended up going haywire, and it had a bunch of false positives, and people actually ended up really wrecking people's lives. They couldn't get home loans. Some people they messed up their permanent record for things. There's all these ways this stuff can go sideways, and I think that's where companies like Brave, where we're trying to think about this really thoroughly before we build, and then we build in the open, and then you can actually have people auditing the stuff. That's kind of a much better way. And I think with AI in particular, the open source side of this is huge, and it's booming, and it's really changing the game, compared to having this all done with proprietary systems. And so, open source ethos are big with Brave, and just like on our wallet, where we don't have one network that we prefer over the other. Our approach is that, users should be able to choose which network they want, and it'll be a matter of time before every network's supported. You can only do what you can do as a startup. But I think with AI too, like it's the same kind of approach where, we have a search index that's ours. It's like there's Google, Bing, and then us. Everybody else is kind of a skin on those two. But we are actually using our search index to power a lot of AI for instant answers and things like that. And so whether it's using local data on the browser, instant stuff from our search index, or large language models, or a mix of all those things, like I think Brave's in a really good place to be using all these things together for users.
A lot of people are scared about AI. I think they're scared because they don't understand. Is that fair to me to say?
Yeah, I think it's very fair. And I think that the just like everything else in the zeitgeist, right? Like look at politics, right? Like people run with fringe and hyperbole. And until people have an understanding of these things, they're going to get afraid of them. And I think that, there's also, like Terminator, all Skynet, all this stuff.
Yes.
But also, like AI is being used in the war zones, right?
Yeah.
Like it is being used on the battlefield. And there are things to be concerned about with that. But I think, to counter all of that, I want video conferencing that works. I want so many things that technology just suck that I think that, as far as it getting smarter than us, I don't know, maybe eventually, but it's not going to be human though. I think there's this whole analog part of life that some of that you shouldn't necessarily make digital either. Like some things are just meant to be experienced, organically. And I think that that's going to be a part of, certainly of Gen Z and millennials are going to have to think about that in a lot different way than previous generations, right? And the problems they're going to have to deal with are a lot different, but that's just because everything's getting more automated and all these things. I think people are afraid of automation too. I think these things get blurred together a lot where, AI means everything. I'm going to be out of a job. I'm going to be out of, in reality, like, the plow took people out of work. The tractor took people out of work. I don't think anybody listening to this would prefer to have a plow and be working a farm. I think that they're glad that we have tractors. And I think it's the same thing with AI. Sure, it can go haywire, but the one thing that's been really interesting, I've interviewed so many people on the technology, on the policy side, on the regulatory side. They all really care. And they might be BSing me or whatever, but you hit a certain sample size and people are concerned about this stuff. And it's comforting to know that people are concerned. You still want to validate everything. Don't get me wrong, but I think that, you're not going to slow this down either. I think that the other parts of the world are going to move way faster. You're seeing it with crypto too. Like the more the U.S. government cracks down and makes it uncertain for people to start companies here, the more the U.S. is going to fall behind. You can't. It's a global technology. It's like saying slow down the internet. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, they also opened the bottle, so the genie's out of the bottle already. So it's at that point where genie's out of the bottle. Now it's time to adapt or really that's it. Adapt or the other avenue, which is not fantastic. Look, we are winding down here. I have a couple more questions. The first one is, we live in a trustless space that is built on trust, if that makes sense, right? It's supposed to be trustless, but we really kind of depend on trust here. What are the key components in building trust, and how have you at Brave, with Brave and Bad as well, have done it so effectively?
Yeah, I think like the first part is building in the open, right? Like the best thing you can do is just put the work out there. I think that, people build trust on, there are inevitabilities in life. No team, no software developer, no project is ever going to make perfect code. Mistakes are going to happen as long as humans are working on things. People build trust on how you handle those mistakes and how you handle it when things go wrong. And if you're building with open source technology and code in the open, people can see that. And if things accidentally happen and you're honest with the user base and you fix it quickly and you try to recover, those are the ways. How you react and how you respond to incidents builds trust in the product. How good the technology is, the quality of it. Are you just giving me a bunch of BS, or is this stuff actually like novel? And is it actually like, are you practicing what you preach? And I think that Brave does a really good job of that. I think some of this is a result of the fact that we don't track users, so we have to be communicating with users all the time, and top down and side to side. Like if you go onto Twitter, BrendanEich, the same guy who created JavaScript I was talking about earlier and did all these amazing things in technology, he will talk to anybody on Twitter. Like he answers users' questions all day. I live on Twitter and I answer questions all day. Like I spend time, I love talking with users. Like I oversee our bat community. Every week I have a call, and sometimes it's just like an hour of tech support where we're just fielding questions. Like I have a group in the community that are working on the wall. It's just amazing people that are like totally want to see Brave win. There's a line where it's like, okay, trust and verify, right? Like Reagan or whatever. But like, but that's true with open source code. And then it's also like, be respectful of your users, right? If you build something that's great, and then you also are cool as a company to be your users, if you're nice with them and like aren't treating them like they owe you something, like if you're just real with people, that's the stuff that carries. Like that's what builds like people will put up with bugs sometimes. And you know, there are tech problems, and there are also startup problems, and there are also economic problems, and there's a lot of stuff you have to deal with. There's a reason why 90% of startups fail, right? Like, I mean, the fact that we're still around is like a miracle in itself when everything we've been doing has been going so against the grain. But we wouldn't have been able to do any of it without users. And I think that's one of the things with BAT too. With what we're doing, we're like, people say like, why are you giving revenue away to the users? Why are you doing that? Like, that's stupid. You're a business. And it's like, well, if we don't have users, then we don't have a business. It's that simple, right? Like, and the big trick on people over the past 20 plus years is for them thinking that the web, they owe the web a favor, when in reality, it's like, dude, they owe you a favor. It's your attention, right? So being open, and then making sure the values line up, and then I mean, like I said earlier, right? Like go to brave.com and the blog and read the first blog post that BrendanEich wrote, and we are even more fanatical about that 8 years later than we were in the beginning. And I think a lot of it is just being in the trenches every day, like practicing what you preach. Like we don't do big reveals. We don't do big events where you have secrecy and stuff. Like there are things that are, are private information with a business, and that's a balancing act in itself. But like we're honest with our users, and we're out there with them. And if you're doing that, like especially if you're a startup, like the more you can kind of work. I never worked at an open source company before I worked at Brave, and it took me a while to get used to it. But it's something I'll never go work for a closed source company after working at Brave, because there's just something great about working in the open. And whether that's with comms or support or business or anything, like if you're building an army of people that are your user base, if you're doing it the right way. If you're doing it the wrong way, then you're just sending them to like, some endless hell of customer support that's not even real. And so, anyway, like, I mean, like that's what I say. My DMs are open to anybody listening to this. If you hate something about Brave, you love something about Brave, something broken, DM me. I'll reply to you. And we always want to know like how we can make things better.
What is brand to you, and how to quantify it?
Brand is like, it's your commercial integrity in the space, basically. Like, your brand is kind of will carry you as you bring new things to market. It will carry you, and people will wear you on their clothing. People will tattoo you on their skin if your brand is powerful enough. People will recognize you all over the world if your brand is powerful enough. It's the statement you make with what you're building and putting into the world. It's hard to quantify that. I think there are ways that you can, though. We do a lot of testing at Brave. We have a VPN service. We've tested that against other better known VPN services. And one thing we find is that when we're running ads for our own services, that sometimes 3, 4, 5 times the engagement rate on those products, because people feel we have brand equity in the market. People feel like if Brave is putting something out, we want to buy it. We want to support the company. Even when we have our search engine, before we even put search ads on it, we had the option for people to buy a premium version of it. They didn't really get anything out of that, but people just did it to support the company. I think like if you can build a good brand, and it means building products, it's like all the stuff I just answered about like the trust, right? Like trust is part of it, but it's also integrity, and it's it's the mission, it's the statements, it's what you're doing, it's how that impacts people. I mean, Coca-Cola, like is huge brand value, right? Like they've spent 100+ years building brand value. It had cocaine in it in the beginning, right? And then they moved to diabetes and all the other things, right? But it's still like, you know what Coca-Cola is because they put something out there that connects with billions of people, right? So a lot of it's that, and how much your mission can be whatever, but you know, if the product's good, it connects with people, and the brand, they'll try other things out with it.
Luke, last thing, where can people keep in touch with you? Where can they learn more about Brave, use the products? Where can they even get to find out what products you guys have available and where to find your podcast?
Yeah, go to brave.com. That's where pretty much all the products are at. Basicattention.org is where the BAT information is. We link things over to there too. I'm on Twitter. Just look up Luke Malks on Twitter. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me. I spend probably too much time there, but again, meeting with the users. And then the podcast, if you go to brave.com/podcast, and we rebranded it to Brave Technologists in season 8. So everything's post season 8 is all like kind of user facing content. And check it out. And ideas for podcast or product or anything, just hit me up. I'm always available on Twitter.
Awesome stuff. Luke, I appreciate your time. Thank you a ton. You dropped a ton of here today. I, for one, do use Brave as well. I even messaged you a couple days ago about the VPN. I think I'm going to make the purchase.
Yes, I'll reply back to that too. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on.
Luke, thank you for your time. Guys, appreciate your time. Great conversation. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.